is learning targets 12 of Unit 4 on plant parts and functions. Plants have three main parts. You've known this since you were little: leaves, stems, and roots. What you may not have known is all three of those parts, all leaves, stems, and roots, are composed of three different tissue types: the dermal tissue, zoom in here, the vascular tissue, and the ground tissue. And if you'll notice, each of those three parts is made up of all three: dermal, vascular, ground, and dermal, vascular, ground, and of course dermal, vascular, ground. So let's look at each of these. The dermal tissue, this consists of the top layer, the epidermal cells, the outermost layer, the epidermis, and this tissue protects the plant. That would be its purpose, is to protect the plant. Usually it's covered by a waxy substance called the cuticle. You can see that here in this picture. Sometimes it's covered with these hair-like projections called trichomes, and the trichomes can take various forms, like a thorn or something like that. It's various functions for those trichomes. In roots, the dermal tissue produces what are called root hairs, and this provides extra surface area for the absorption of water and nutrients in through the roots. Vascular tissue is composed of two parts: xylem and phloem. And the xylem tissue on the left carries water throughout the plant. Xylem carries water throughout the plant. And xylem is composed of these cells called tracheids. Think of the word trachea. It's a tube that goes through our neck to connect our mouth to our lungs so that we can breathe in. Well, tracheids are these hollow cells. These are cells that have died for the cause of the plant, and they leave these hollow tubes in the plant. You can kind of see them here, these hollow tubes, and they kind of stack on one another. And what these tracheids do, along with these other vessel elements, the other vessel elements are found in different kinds of plants, but tracheids are found in all plants. And these tracheids will transport water up the plant. And how do they do that? Well, through this capillary action that we've talked about in a previous unit. We'll get into that more as well when we talk about what transpiration is in a few minutes. Phloem transports, this is an easy way to remember this, phloem transports food or the sugar down the plant. And phloem is composed of cells called sieve cells. And these sieve cells are these big long cells that look like tubes, but they're actually alive. They just lose many of their structures, and so they are accompanied by these companion cells for different cell parts, different cell production, like proteins and other things that cells need, that the phloem or the sieve cells are not able to produce. The companion cells act as their companion and assist them in that. Much more complicated info here located for xylem and phloem, but we're going to keep it very simple. Xylem, water, and phloem, food. The ground tissue are types of support tissues for the plant, and these are basically the filler in the plant. The parenchyma, that's how you pronounce that. These are cells that have this giant water-filled vacuole in the middle. You can see there in those cells that most of the cell, if this is the cell, most of the cell is this water-filled vacuole here in the middle. And kind of got that going. But the parenchyma is the soft tissue. This is like a softer kind of tissue, but it still gives the plant support and fills out the plant. The parenchyma, on the other hand, These are strong, flexible cells. They have very strong, flexible cell walls. They support larger plants. A great example of parenchyma are like celery strings. Think of a celery string being the support for the back of a celery. They give the celery flexibility. They allow the celery to grow tall. And then lastly are the sclerenchyma. You can see these cells have very thick cell walls. And this sclerenchyma have extremely thick, rigid cell walls for strength. And so three types of ground tissue. Think support when you think of ground tissue. Now, one other tissue type to mention that is a special tissue type is meristematic tissue. And these are undifferentiated cells. I mean, think of this word, undifferentiated. Undifferentiated, meaning they are all the same. They haven't been made to be different yet. This is where all the plant growth takes place. It's either at the top of the plant or the very bottom of the plant. This is called the apical meristem, the top and the bottom, or the lateral meristems, which are located on the sides of the plant. And undifferentiated meaning that the plant has not yet assigned these cells a particular job. They haven't become ground tissue or vascular tissue or dermal tissue yet. They are just nothing. And so the plant will decide, based on the need, what sort of cell they need to become. So think of them as kind of like a plant's stem cells, in that way, and that way only. But they are very similar in that they're undifferentiated cells. And the apical meristems provide the primary growth for plants. Primary growth meaning the growth that goes either up or down into the ground or up towards the sky, whereas lateral growth is the thickness of the plant. That's secondary growth. So primary growth up or down, and secondary growth would be more thickness of the plant. I'll mention that in a minute too. Two types of roots, the taproot and the fibrous root system. I think of the taproot as being a tree, kind of like an upside down tree, as it were. And I think of the fibrous roots as being more like a bush, where none of the roots are bigger than the other. One thing that may be helpful in this is to just turn this picture upside down. You can really see this because see the fibrous roots there look like a bush, and the taproot really does look like some sort of tree. And the taproot is just one big root going straight down to the ground with these little branches off of it, whereas the fibrous roots, one net is bigger than the other, really, in the fibrous roots. So a few pieces of root anatomy here. Here's a picture of a root. There are the root hairs, which we mentioned earlier, covering the surface, give the root more surface area. The cortex, which is the spongy ground tissue just inside. This fills out the root, gives it structure. The endodermis, this is the area enclosing the vascular tissue inside. It's almost like an inside skin, almost. And then this root cap down here. The root cap serves a couple of purposes. It protects the apical meristem tissue that's located right here, and it also serves to help dig the plant deeper. As these old cells kind of slough off to the side, it actually causes the plant to dig deeper into the ground. And of course, roots function by bringing in nutrients. Well, how do they do that? Well, on the left here you have some root cells. On the right you have like dirt and things. And what the plant will actually do is it will actively transport materials into the inside of the cell. These are like nutrients and salt and sugar, not sugar so much in the ground, but just different sorts of nutrients, whatever might be in the ground that's needed, nitrates and phosphorus and lots of things. Well, this builds a concentration gradient, does it not? Whereas the cells are hypertonic and the outside is hypotonic, the water, and so what does water want to do? Go into the cells. Hypo to hyper. And what is this called? This is called osmosis. And so by actively transporting solutes into the cells that the plant needs, nutrients and such, it causes the water to just pour into the cells via osmosis. Stems, seemingly the most boring part of the plant, but they have some important functions. There are three functions. First function is to produce leaves, branches, and flowers. All of those, leaves, branches, and flowers, that's being one function. They hold the leaves up to the sun, very important function for plants because they don't function as a plant without being able to do photosynthesis. And they transport materials through the length of the plant. Some stems are very long. Stems are made up of nodes and internodes. The nodes here, this is where the leaf, stems, or flowers are located. And the internode is the space in between the node. Pretty straightforward. You can look at how many nodes a plant has, and you can tell how well it's producing and that sort of thing. Monocot versus dicot stems, we've talked a little bit about this, but with the dicot stem here on the left, you can see these are called vascular bundles because they're bundled up vascular tissue, xylems and phloems. And notice how they're nice and organized here. This nice little ring around. And in the middle, you have this area called the pith, which is just full of this parenchyma ground tissue. It kind of fills out the plant. Whereas a monocot stem, there's no real order to the vascular bundles, and they're real small, almost like a pizza. Just going to toss some of the pepperonis on there. I wouldn't call it random, but there's seemingly no order to how they are arranged. And we mentioned this primary and secondary growth earlier, but I do want to show you this picture. Primary growth, up and down, out. And secondary growth is girth, thickness of the plant, as opposed to length. It may benefit a plant to grow up rather than out. If a plant is competing for sunlight, it obviously wants to be taller than the plants next to it, and it will grow taller rather than thicker, whereas like a tree planted in a yard somewhere doesn't have to compete for sunlight, and so will grow very thick rather than grow high. Plants create a substance called wood, and they're not all plants. This is just a buildup of xylem tissue year after year. You know, a tree has these growth rings that we're all familiar with. Well, this is just a buildup of xylem tissue, and it hardens and creates wood, still being used because remember, xylem tissue is just dead cells anyway. And so the tree has many rings of this xylem tissue. Lastly, to talk about leaves. Leaves are made up of two basic structures. The blade, or the flattened section of the leaf here. This is for the photosynthesis. And then this is called the petiole. And it's, I hesitate to say stem, so we'll use the word here, stalk, that supports the blade that holds it to the branch, because it's not really a stem. And on the leaf, microscopic cells called guard cells are all around. And these guard cells control the flow of water and CO2 in and out of the leaf. And these guard cells look much like a, I don't know, like a fish or something weird. However, very important for plant function because let's say it's hot outside and there's no rain. Well, these guard cells can close to keep moisture in and maybe open at night to allow CO2 in. And so this is a great way of regulating plant function and helping the plant to preserve water. Speaking of water, transpiration. This is the evaporation of water from the surface of the leaves. Transpiration, evaporation of water from the surface of the leaves. Now, what does this cause to happen? Well, as water is evaporating from the surface of the leaves, because water loves itself so much, it is pulling up the water from lower down in the plant. And so that causes this constant flow of water up from the roots throughout the whole plant. And that's how the plant gets water through all of its cells, is through transpiration and this action that we call capillary action, which depends on water's love for itself, cohesion, and adhesion as well, water's love for the xylem tissue that it's traveling up.